Since the days of Lewis and Clark, America has looked westward to the Columbia River. An endless caravan has followed the Oregon Trail to the broad Columbia, whose waters drain an empire as large as England and France. To countless Americans, the Columbia has been a river of hope, a shining symbol of plenty, with its water and woods, its wheatlands, pastures, and power. And men have followed the great river of the West down to the Pacific, on foot and wagon and raft, later by highway, rail, and steamer. Ceaselessly they came to sow their crops and cut the timber, to ship them down the Columbia to the markets of the world. To build the empire Thomas Jefferson visioned when America was young. The story of the Northwest is a saga of commerce, of outbound vessels carrying off the produce of a virgin country. Upstream and in the mountain tributaries, the Columbia is a wild and uncontrolled giant. Boiling over rapids and cataracts, 10 million horses plunge relentlessly downward to the sea. From the beginning of time, this power has roared unharnessed to the Pacific. Only the Royal Chinook, instinctively fighting its way upward to spawn, can defy the crashing falls and cascades. For 100 years, the river of the West was untamed. The same swirling fury which Indians have whipped for salmon since the days of Captain Meriwether Lewis. In 1927, the immense power possibilities of the Columbia were surveyed and charted. The Army engineers explored the river and recommended construction of 9 huge dams to capture the full benefits of America's greatest power stream. At Bonneville, Oregon, man takes up the struggle against the frontier. Cascade Rapids, since pioneer days the graveyard of ill-fated ships, in 1933 make way for Bonneville Dam. America's conquest of the Columbia has begun. Its seething waters are pushed northward, away from the Oregon shore, and a barricade of steel holds the river at bay. Inside the huge coffer dam, men gouge at the river bottom. Outside the protecting wall, the Columbia hammers and roars. An army of skilled men, many of them jobless for years, work at top speed to outwit the rising waters. Out of steel and concrete, they weld their answer to the river's fury. Together, they scooped 4 million yards out of the rock-studded depths of Cascade Rapids. At its foot, they threw up a 1,000,000-yard barrier of concrete. Mix and pour, mix and pour. Day and night, sand and gravel and cement were merged in the massive structure rising in the river chasm. As the powerhouse takes shape on the drawing board, the very force that for years blocked the river now makes possible a new northwest passage. Plummeting 35 feet downward in its mad race across Cascade Rapids, the Columbia thunders an anthem of power. river virtually turns on its edge, it rushes headlong past Bonneville like a cavalry charge of 500,000 horses. Today, Bonneville Dam stands completed. Just as the Nile is the lifeblood of the historic land it drains, so this river of the West is the key to the future of the Oregon country. Since the couriers of the Hudson Bay Company threaded their course upstream 1,000 miles, the Columbia has been the artery of the Northwest. Bonneville Dam, a symbol of power and passage, opens up a region that has more than 13% of the nation's area, but less than 3% of its people. Its mighty piers have halted the dashings of the Columbia and pushed its waters back to Celilo, 187 miles from the Pacific. So the old Oregon Trail becomes a northwest passage to America's last frontier, and Bonneville the entrance to a promised land. There's a rebirth of shipping on the Columbia. The highest single lift lock in the world has conquered Cascade Rapids, and it's full speed ahead to the Dalles. Riverboats soon will whistle to passing ocean steamers when the 27-foot channel to Bonneville is completed. 500 feet long and 76 feet wide, Bonneville's lock opens the Columbia Seaway to the commerce of the world. It's a far cry from the old mule portage that carried goods around Cascade Rapids. Already, tonnage has tripled on the upper river. 66 feet straight up, a shipload of gasoline clears the lock, and it's cheaper driving for the cattlemen at Pendleton. To the farmer, Bonneville's lock means lower freight costs for every bushel of wheat. Transportation on the inland seaway puts idle resources to work as another ship is locked through at Bonneville. But all along the river, thousands of anxious fishermen ask one question: could the salmon get over the dam? The Royal Chinook can leap at 20-foot falls, but it cannot hurdle the sheer ramparts at Bonneville, and it must get upstream to spawn. So a mile-long fishway was built around the dam, the strangest channel ever made by man. Instinctively, unerringly, salmon head upstream, and they find the new passage much easier than the boiling Cascade Rapids of yesterday. To forecast future salmon runs, every one of the migrating fish is counted. A 30-pound salmon thrashing and plunging at the end of a line is a thrill never to be forgotten. But to thousands of families along the Columbia, the king salmon means their very existence. Chief Tommy can go on spearing the Royal Chinook in the tumultuous roar of Celilo Falls. The salmon are going through. Keystone of the entire Columbia development is hydro, the eternal power of the river. Stripping the Columbia of its energy, Bonneville is an oil well that never will run dry. An ageless servant that will toil as long as the rain comes down and water seeks its birthplace in the sea. Here, 10 mammoth generators will capture 500,000 kilowatts from a shackled giant. A labyrinth of transformers steps up the voltage 10 times, power for 1 million people. Above the roar of the river and the whir of the turbine, slender threads of silver swing over the land, carrying the surge of hydro to a waiting people. But Bonneville is only the beginning. 300 miles upstream at Grand Coulee, reclamation engineers are pushing the river upwards into a 23-mile canyon carved out during the Ice Age. Greater than the Panama Canal or the pyramids of Egypt, Grand Coulee will produce the energy of 2.5 million horses, surging, driving, twisting, furnishing power and water for an inland empire. Night and day, thousands work on the biggest job man has ever tackled. Back of the coulee is a story of blighted hopes and human despair. Men against the desert, and the desert won. A stone's throw from the Columbia, greasewood and sagebrush have reclaimed their own. Once a thriving wheatland, the pride and toil of transplanted Midwest farmers. Now parched as the sands of Arabia. 8 inches of rain, too little for any crop. A year or two and the surface water was gone. And so were the farmers. Hopes tumbled, lives blighted. Where are they today? $300 for a down payment. The dream of a new home, electric lights, a sewing machine, college for Billy. An endless string of refugees from the Dust Bowl, 500,000 of them, have gazed at the arid acres and moved on. Broken wagon wheels and bleached cattle bones were warning enough. But the jackhammers of Grand Coulee thunder a call to arms against the desert. Water! Water for rich brown earth, spreading out as big as Delaware. 40 acres of garden land for the farmer burned out by dust and drought. A chance for the little fellow in the Big Bend country. Water and power and land. An American destiny for 500,000 migrant people. For decades, the Pacific Northwest has lived on its vast forest resources. 90 million acres of towering majesty. Fir, spruce, pine. More than half the nation's marketable lumber, waiting axe-ripe on the evergreen ridges. Timber! To 1/4 of the people of the Northwest, this cry echoing through the forest uplands has meant life itself. The crash of falling timber and the screech of the whirring saw has spelled food and home and clothes. Shoes so Johnny can go to school. Milk for the new baby. Tires for the old car. With broad-bladed axe and cross-cut saw, Paul Bunyan has ranged up and down the Columbia. Trees that sprouted when Balboa first sighted the Pacific. Pines that were saplings when Galileo invented the telescope. 1,000-year-old firs that were mature when King John signed the Magna Carta. All yield to axe and donkey engine and highline. Shoot them off the hillside, snake them down the creek, raft them down the river, out to the Pacific, to Africa and Australia and Ireland. Ties for the Trans-Siberian Railway, timbers for a North China mine. But you cannot log forever. Thaw and fire and blight claim the timber faster than it grows. What of tomorrow? What of today? A war on the continent closes 100 markets. A tariff in the Far East shuts out our lumber. A laboratory 1,000 miles away substitutes lime for lumber and makes paper out of corn stalks. Douglas fir, $30 a thousand. Douglas fir, $18 a thousand. Douglas fir, $11 a thousand. $11 a thousand board feet. And Jim Barnes, sawyer, is on the street. Jack White, high climber at $14 a day when he works, will take a job for $1 or a dime or a hamburger. It's the ups and downs of the lumber trade, and the Northwest has ridden the crests and troughs. More than half the region's industrial workers depend on lumber, a colonial empire at the mercy of world markets, a colonial empire stripped of its resources for the enrichment of other lands. To Jim Barnes and Jack White, electric cooking is nice if they have something to cook. But to them, Columbia River power means more than electricity in the kitchen or better lighting on the street corners. It means the chance for a steady job when the sawmills fold up and the bottom drops out of lumber. It means new industries to take the place of cut-over forests and lost markets. And there are lots of Jim Barnes and Jack Whites. Every state has sent its quota to the Northwest. Men looking for jobs. Looking and not finding them. But a new day is dawning on the banks of the Columbia. Bonneville Power is stirring hope, the promise of industrial development. Jobs for willing men. Jobs for skilled hands. The chance to earn a living in the American way. On the Columbia River, a vast new industry is rising, a symbol of the place of power in a new age. Not another sawmill that will cut off and get out, but huge metallurgical industries, taking minerals from the earth and power from the water. A new alchemy, transmuting common clay into shining metals for a myriad of human needs. No longer will man ignore the treasures underfoot, metallic wealth buried throughout the sprawling Northwest. Untouched deposits of nickel, the rich red cinnabar ore of mercury, and chromite and manganese, metals essential to our national security. Zinc and copper and iron waiting in abundance, and silver and gold buried in nearly every county. All these await the enterprise of man, and Columbia River Power is breaking the trail. Electricity is the lifeblood of chemical industry. In the magic of the electrolytic cell, new products are born, and whirling atoms reshape the course of human living. A surge of current and brine from the sea is transformed into chemical weapons to help farmers subdue an encroaching army of weeds. In the northwest corner of America, electric power furnishes employment and strengthens our defenses. Columbia River is boundless energy to extract metals from the ores of 1,000 mines. Zinc for brass and paint and casting. Chromium for steel and armor plate. Phosphates for fertilizer and chemicals. Manganese and aluminum and magnesium, all basic to Western civilization. Products to build the richness of our daily lives. And, if we must, to forge the weapons of defense, to safeguard the liberty we know, so that the least of us may walk our way in freedom. An unshackled giant becomes a seaway to an empire. The promise of power for every corner of the Northwest. Power to make 1.25 million acres bloom again. Power to push the city to the farthest county line. To bring better crops and better living to the farmers of the region. Power for the home. Good light for Billy's eyes. Electric cooking for Mother. The comfort of electric heat and electric cold. Leisure to replace the burdens of an outworn era. Power to uncover a treasure trove of idle resources, to turn them into useful goods for which a nation waits. Power for millions of Americans who look westward hopefully, for land and jobs, for security and happiness. Power to make the American dream come true. As power makes jobs for America's men, it builds democracy from within, the strongest assurance of a continued government of all the people. Back of the American way of life is hydro, the controlled power of the river, the thrust of the turbine, the crescendo of the generator, humming a saga of man's triumph over a continent. Today, the Argonaut spirit of Lewis and Clark is pushing the frontier forward. Thomas Jefferson's vision of a great, free, and independent empire is unfolding in dramatic realization on the banks of the Columbia. In the chaos of a troubled world, while other nations struggle for land and markets, America builds her own, her power and her glory, as she takes up the challenge of the Columbia.